guys? Welcome back to the Strong.Sistas YouTube channel. In today's interview, I am fortunate to be able to chat with Kate Deering about pro-metabolic, bioenergetic, or Ray Peat nutrition strategy. So if your current nutrition strategy is working for you, that is great. However, if it isn't, in this interview, we are going to discuss an alternative way of looking at food and fuel that is different than keto, low carb, and fasting as an alternative approach if your current nutrition strategy is not working for you and it is very different from the standard American diet and typical health advice in the mainstream. So in today's video, we discuss some of the main principles of the pro-metabolic style of eating, and then Kate gives her tips for transitioning into this way of eating. So if you haven't already, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button, and I hope you keep an open mind during this conversation, and I hope you guys enjoy. All right, Kate, thank you so much for hopping on the channel today. If we could start off this discussion with who is Kate, and tell us a little bit about your health and wellness journey and how you stumbled upon Ray Peat and the pro-metabolic community.
Okay, well, first, thanks for having me here. So I've been in the health and fitness industry pretty much all my life. I ran health clubs early in my career. Then I became a trainer. I moved out to California, started getting into nutrition, got into the Paul Chek world for a bit. And that really actually helped me because it kind of made me realize real food is best. And it also made me look at different avenues of health, just like stress and the other things that might be affecting us or me. And then ultimately, when I was about 38, 39-ish, probably about 10 years ago, I started having some health issues, and which kind of was resulting in kind of some painful periods. I wasn't sleeping very well. I wasn't recovering from my excessive amount of exercise. I was definitely a over exerciser. And at the time, I thought I was eating a very clean diet. It was fairly low carb. It certainly wasn't keto or carnivore, but it would range anywhere from about 50 grams, maybe up to 100 grams a day, and primarily proteins and things like almond milk and your basic clean diet. And things started going south, and I just had no idea what was happening to me. And at the time, I went and actually took a course with the Chek institution, and my good friend Josh Rubin was teaching it. And Josh, I think, was getting into learning about Ray Peat. And of course, he started talking about it a little bit, and I was like, what? Temp and pulse. And immediately in the class, I was taking my temp and pulse, and I was like 96 degrees. And I'm like, oh my God. So anyways, that started my rabbit hole that I went in deep with about 2 years of just reading anything and everything and trying to understand. And it was a lot of unlearning, because when you're really deep into the health and fitness industry for as long as I was, it was like, it made sense, but my old brain was like, but no, we got to keep exercising and eating less. And so it took a bit for me to really wrap my head. I just submerged myself into it. And literally I got in like a lot of people did. I jumped in with 2 feet. All of a sudden I went from, chicken and vegetables and oatmeal and almond milk to dairy and butter and fruit and juice and everything like 100%. And I had some massive side effects. I think I had a lot of estrogen dominance issues initially. I had rashes. My cholesterol went up to like 300. I had a lot of crazy things happen, but again, ultimately it all made sense. So I stuck it out. And in 6 months, things started kind of balancing out, but within a year, things really improved for me. And all of a sudden, I was able to eat a lot more. I felt a lot better. I stopped trying to kill myself with all the exercise. I was able to maintain muscle mass, not realizing how destructive I was being with myself. And ultimately, I was like, holy cow, I'm almost 40 now. I feel way better than I have in years. And how do I explain to people now that sugar is good? And so that's where I got into the thought of writing this book. And I was like, because it was taking me so long to get to that place to help them understand why it was good for them, that I was like, I need something else to give them so I can save them a lot of money to get to that place, and so that they can start making sense of this at a quicker pace than I did.
Yeah. It sounds like we have a very similar past. I've always been like really lean. I've never had an issue with like binging. I've always been able to be like strong about like my diet and routine and everything. And Definitely orthorexic, kind of like afraid of certain foods. And when I thought something was like, this is the answer to my health, I would go 100% on it. And then, like you had, like always in the back of my brain, like, okay, exercise and move more than I consume calorie wise. And I always had that like balance in my head. And so that just led to just like a whole number of years of just like restrictive dieting and restrictive kind of just lifestyle choices. And ultimately, I reached like a cortisol dead stop. And running on cortisol and adrenaline no longer felt good anymore. And then Sarah and I stumbled upon Dr. Ray Peat's work. And like you mentioned, a lot of his stuff isn't mainstream because it kind of is conflicting with a lot of like mainstream medical advice and nutrition advice. And so it is hard to kind of navigate all of this stuff. And then we found your book, How to Heal Your Metabolism. And I really appreciate how you have like collected most of Dr. Ray Peat's work into an easy to read book where people can apply these principles and practices in everyday life. So I appreciate you spending the time digging down those rabbit holes because it certainly helped Sarah and I when we were looking for something to make us feel better. And Sarah definitely had a little bit more like estrogen dominant symptoms coming out of a previous more like fasting and low carb approach. I think that I took a little bit more of a gradual approach, and we'll get into this in our discussion about like how to transition. Sarah definitely went like full in. I went a little bit more gradual, and so I didn't notice as many adverse symptoms from the start. However, her hormones healed faster, and I'm still healing from mine. So I think it's kind of like you trade off, right, with like how fast you're going to heal versus how many adverse effects you're going to have. And so I think everyone needs to kind of tailor their transition into this style of eating based on their past and what they feel comfortable with and their endocrine system and things like that. So, okay, can we get into kind of Kate's definition of what is pro-metabolic, aka bioenergetic, aka Ray Peat diet? I hate the word diet, but Ray Peat nutrition strategies.
Yeah, I'm with you. I kind of hate all those things too. And I mean, I always come from the perspective of what does your body need to produce the highest amount of energy for you to feel good, essentially. And so for me, it always comes down to the cell. It's like the cell is your powerhouse, or at least the mitochondria in there, of where you are producing all your energy, right? And cells make up tissue, and the tissues make up organs, and organs make up your body. So if we can go down to the basics of what does your cell need optimally to produce as much energy as possible, because that's when you are going to feel best. You look at that. And so in it, and I've just kind of written about this lately because I feel like, we really have to get down to the basics sometimes. And when you look at what your cell essentially needs to run through cellular metabolism, through respiration, it comes down to literally four main things, and so it's not that simple, but it is on some level. And it essentially comes down to glucose, it comes down to oxygen, it comes down to the vitamins and minerals that are present during cellular respiration. And then it's also, you need thyroid to help increase the oxidation or increase oxygen use so that you can raise the metabolism. And so when you take it out and you look at those things, you're like, okay, well, what does that even look like? And then that comes down to the foods that might be present that would help support that the best. And so it usually comes down to easy to digest nutritional foods. It comes down to things like beef liver and oysters and dairy, because they are so highly packed with nutrition and they give you the biggest bang for your buck. Because it's not like, hey, just eat this and it's going to get you better. But it's like, look, these are going to supply your system with a lot of the nutrients that probably at this point that you're depleted and deficient in. And again, if you've been running on stress hormones, or if you have been a low metabolic state, we always have to remember where you're coming from, which is a state where you had trained your body to use less nutrition. And so on some level, you have to go, all right, if all of a sudden we speed you up and we don't supply you with all these fundamental, good, highly nutrition foods, you will feel like crap on some other level, or something, or other symptom can show up. And so that can be part of the healing journey, right? And that's why I think you hear people like, hey, I started doing this and in a month this happened, or this is showing up, or this is showing up. And normally it's your body finally saying, okay, you've revved me up now. Now it's time, we have to figure out what you need to support that. What else could be missing? And so that's all part of the journey that kind of goes through this. So it's never like this black and white, take this and that, and it's all going to be good. It's like, do this, see what happens, and then evaluate, and then take the next step and go from there. So I guess to sum it up, the pro-metabolic is a constant shift of finding the energy sources and nutrition that support your body through the journey.
I think it also helps to reflect that like our body is not going to thrive on air. Our bodies are going to thrive when given the optimal fuel source and the optimal nutrients to be able to perform all of the body functions, right? So, um, I, correct me if I'm wrong. I want to say that like the pro-metabolic state, I believe Dr. Ray Peat has mentioned this a number of times. We're trying to emulate how a younger child's body works, where they have high body temperature, they have a lot of energy, their body is producing energy relatively easy, they have a high metabolism. And honestly, Kate, like that is really opposite of what some of these alternative communities are proposing. Some people say a slow metabolism is a good thing. Like there's nothing wrong with a slowed metabolism because then our body can thrive off of less nutrients and less calories. And so it kind of is really opposite of what some individuals are saying in, I would say, like the alternative health community.
Yeah, well, I think that's like the rate of living theory, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, and I think, and I listened to yours and George, and I think you kind of touched on it, and it's essentially like, we're not a car. You can't run us into the ground like a car. Eventually, it's going to run down. You're going to use it all up. And it's going to break down, and that's going to be the end of it, right? So the human body certainly can do that, and over time, there's going to be some aging process. But if we supply ourselves with the right fuel and nutrients, we can recoup and we can heal and we can regenerate and keep ourselves in a youthful state for a much longer period of time. So, yes, you can choose A, which is eat less and have less nutritional requirements. And I think if probably you can't eat a lot of food, that's what your body is developed to do, is keep you alive into that state with less nutrition and energy. So that is a survival technique. But it's not going to be the one that you're going to essentially thrive in. And it's not going to be a state in, let's just say you get an injury that you need to heal from. It's not going to probably be a very quick healing injury, right? Because you're in that low metabolic state, everything is going to be slower. And so when you are in a high metabolic state and you have cell turnover that's constantly regenerating because you have enough fuel to keep yourself in that state, then you are going to heal much quicker, just like a child or a baby heals. I think they say if a baby injures itself in the womb because of all the carbon dioxide and so forth, there will be there's no scar tissue, right? Because there's just such a fast turnover. And that's what essentially glucose does as an energy source. It's a very fast turnover. So it makes us kind of become more wasteful. We utilize more energy because we have this good fuel source. But with that becomes the ability to fuel all of our systems so that we can work and function optimally.
I think this is correct, but if your metabolism slows, if you're consuming like inadequate amounts of calories and nutrients, um, something else has got to give, right? So if something slows down, your body is going to cut out something that isn't necessary to prioritize things that keep us alive. And so I think the biggest example is like female reproductive capability. That's not a requirement for living. That's like a luxury this day and age, which is sad, right?
Yep.
But if you aren't consuming enough calories, if you're fasting excessively, if your body feels deprived, it's going to shut off proper hormone production so that it can use the limited amount of nutrients that you provide it for vital things that keep us alive. And so I think that that's kind of left out of the discussion a lot too, is if we want to make sure that like all of the functions in our body are functioning properly at the correct rate and so that we can thrive, that does require more calories and more nutrients. And that discussion is kind of left out. So I think one of the biggest realizations that I had was just like, hey, I actually like I am pursuing optimal health and I do want to thrive. Why am I going to choose to deprive my body of nutrients? Let's give it the tools that it needs to be able to thrive.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think you're right. Look, your body's number one job is to keep you alive, period.
Yeah.
So when you know that, so it's always going to give resources to the vital organs that are going to keep you alive. Your brain, your heart, your lungs, they get it first. The other stuff like digestion and hormonal function and keeping your muscle tissue, like those don't get as much when you are under fueling. You can see what happens to somebody when they don't eat for a long time, right? They become constipated, they don't have their period, and they lose muscle tone, along with their hair falling out and a lot of other things that actually require fuel to continue. And so, but they're still breathing and they're still walking around and they can think maybe. I mean, but everything becomes depleted. And all you have to do, just don't eat for a while, see what happens.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's a quick way to do it. But if you slowly start to do it, right, your body will adapt to that. And essentially, yeah, everything becomes a little bit slower.
Yeah.
And, that's part of the process when you don't fuel yourself optimally.
So, what are some of the benefits of properly fueling and having a high metabolic rate? You touched on one, such as digestion. So, when your metabolism is high, your body is going to produce the tools, like, for example, like stomach acid, to be able to properly digest food, and it can improve your transit time. So, the number of times you poop and the frequency of your pooping, for example. What are some other benefits of a high metabolic rate?
Well, you're going to have a very warm body, which is nice, right? So you'll usually have these nice warm hand and feet, which, and your body should be at like a good 98.6 plus temperature, right? We know you're utilizing fuel and burning fuel when your body temperature is warm. That's just one of the note we're producing heat. You're going to have good hormonal function. So you should have a painful period. You should be
Not should not have a painful period.
you should not you should know, I'm sorry, yeah. You should not have a painful period.
Yeah.
That's what happens. You should be fertile, right? You should actually want to have sex, you should have a libido. I mean, there is so many people in today's world that I talk to that their sex drive is just dead. And because I attract a lot of fitness people, yeah, that usually goes hand in hand with people that are working out a lot, right? They have no sex drive.
Yeah.
And so you are not going to be urinating 20 times a day, right? When we kind of overwater and under mineralize, you're just going to pee everything out. And we need both of those, right? We need good mineral function to basically keep our system working optimally. And it's a big part of having a good period and having good digestion. So peeing 20 times a day is not optimal. You shouldn't be walking around with a gallon of water with you all the time. It's not a good idea. You're going to be able to maintain muscle mass without excessive amounts of working out. A good 2 to 3 times a week is plenty. That should be the job, is to maintain it. You want muscle mass. Obviously, that helps burn more calories, but muscle is also consumes more energy, right? So you have to continually supply it with fuel if you want to maintain it. What I always try to tell people, I go, look, when you increase your metabolism, there's now responsibility with that. With that is you now have to continue to eat optimally, give your body enough nutrition and fuel, or your body will shift again. So it's not about getting it up there, revving it up so that you can just lose tons of body fat, which I think a lot of people walk into this hoping for. I go, no, this is a responsibility to eat well, and your body will shift for that. And then it will shift again as you generally improve. But then once you get to that place of a high metabolism, well, now you have to continue with that, right? Now you have to continue to eat well and supply yourself with enough fuel.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So can we go over some of the like main principles of the pro-metabolic approach? So I'll start with one, for example, which is primarily using carbohydrates as your main source of fuel. So what are some of, and I guess, so what is the main reason for that as one follow-up?
Well, like I said in the beginning, when we go back to our main fuel source for our cells, it's always going to be glucose. And so carbohydrates need to be a predominant, well, that is essentially your optimal fuel source, right? We as humans are really cool that we can actually use other resources. We're not like a car. We just, we can actually use fats and proteins as fuel. but carbohydrates are always going to be your most optimal source. And the main reason for that is solely because of the amount of, I believe, the amount of carbon dioxide that is going to produce with glucose metabolism. It's going to produce, I think, almost double what fat metabolism will produce.
Yeah, I was looking
And
at
so,
that today. It's like,
I'm,
yeah, double the
yeah,
amount. Yeah.
yeah, just from it, because I think it produces carbon dioxide right between glucose and pyruvate. And so there's carbon dioxide produced there, and then it got produced again in the Krebs cycle. But that alone, and because you want carbon dioxide in the tissue, because that's what's going to facilitate the oxygen to get into the tissue. That's going to actually be the cellular respiration, is that exchange of gases. And if that doesn't happen for some reason, you have not enough oxygen in the tissue, then that's when you're going to start having issues. They're not going to, you're not being able to have that exchange go as well. And that's when you're going to start people getting more lactic acid buildup or lactic acid production, or I should say lactate production, which is going to be far less efficient and going to create a whole nother set of issues. So with proper glucose metabolism, you're going to get better, more energy essentially, because it's going to also move through your system much faster, producing more ATP long term. And so for that, again, is our main goal, is to try to produce energy to fuel our system. So the other reason, or the other, is solely because of the high mineral content of carbohydrates, at least if you pick certain ones. Now, the caveat is with carbohydrates, this doesn't mean things like cookies and cakes and candy or whatever. Yes, they are partially carbohydrates, but they're normally also usually getting flour and probably some vegetable oil. Like those aren't what we're looking for here, because that's just a combination of food. But more optimally are you're looking at fruits, juices, root vegetables. I like fruit vegetables like your squashes, something that is accessibly easy for your body to break down so that it can be utilized as fuel. The other reason we use these easy to digest carbohydrates, a lot of the reason is because usually when people walk into this world, they are very compromised. Their bodies need fuel, but they're being taxed so much. So we need to give them accessibility to easy accessible fuel, meaning we don't want their body to have to work super hard to break down the energy that they're trying to get. And I think that's a mind shift for a lot of people, because they're always like, I want to eat all this fuel that has no energy, right? Because I maybe wanting to get some nutrients, but I don't want the calories. So I'll eat a bunch of lettuce and I'll get the nutrients, and then I'm not going to gain any weight because I'm not eating any calories. And I'm like, doesn't work that way. I mean, it can, you will eventually lose weight, but then the system slows down that way. And usually what happens in that course is your digestive system isn't working optimally. Everything's going to slow down. So you're going to have a lot of roadblocks just getting what you need anyways. So easy to digest carbohydrates, primarily for carbon dioxide production and for energy production.
Okay, so carb fueled for CO2 and energy production. And then, like you just mentioned, for those carbohydrates, choose them wisely. We want to prioritize easy to digest so that your body doesn't have to expend a lot of energy, and then also cause a lot of gut distress, because a lot of us come to this with compromised gut systems to begin with. And so a lot of like tough to break down carbohydrates like beans and stuff like that, sometimes like whole grains, that can cause gut distress, and that can lead to a whole nother host of issues. And then I think another main principle would be like for protein sources, we want to focus on animal protein sources.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the animal sources, primarily are because the nutrients that are going to be in there are going to be far more bioavailable than the vegetable sources. And the protein is just better quality. And you don't need as much animal protein. I think you need almost double if you're going to do vegetable source to get the same amount of quality protein. So animal sources, all the nutrients are more bioavailable. So, and then that is going to look at things like dairy, which we can probably touch on as a whole separate topic.
Yeah.
But I think dairy is like the perfect food. I mean, it is a protein, but it has fat and carbs as well. But it has tons of calcium in it, and it also has tons of other nutrients in it. And so, to me, and that's kind of what you're looking for. Other sources, of course, are things like all your shellfish. They have a high nutritional. They have all your kind of your micro minerals in there, and so those are certainly bioavailable than anything that you're going to get in a vegetable source. Everything in the vegetable source is usually going to be bound in some sort of fiber source, which is going to be a lot harder again for your body to get what it needs. And we are trying to get everything easily accessible so that your body can utilize it. Because ultimately, probably if you've gotten to this point, your body is super compromised and everything needs to be easier.
Yeah. Okay, so then touching on one thing you mentioned, so fiber. Um, can you explain a little bit the pro-metabolic view on fiber? Because you've got, things like the Ray Peat carrot salad where you're consuming carrot fibers, but then you have like orange juice, pulp free. So can you explain the pro-metabolic view on different fiber sources?
Yeah. So first, fiber isn't bad, and there's a lot of good with fiber. It does help pull things through. What the fiber is, I think, is the difference here. The raw carrot, because it's a below ground vegetable, it has more antimicrobial properties. It doesn't tend to feed the bacteria like other fibers that you might get from like a green leafy salad. And because of all of those good antimicrobial, antibacterial properties of the raw carrot, it basically works as like a scrub brush through your intestinal walls, cleaning it out. They've actually had studies on it that is very helpful in removing estrogen from the system. So if you have some estrogen detoxification issues, the raw carrot salad is invaluable. And obviously adding other things like the coconut oil, refined coconut oil, again, to remove the fibers, and also some vinegar also adds just more antimicrobial, antifungal properties to help really clean the gut out. The other ones, like I said, lettuces or even starchy foods, I think because they really interfere and they can slow down the digestive process, tend to feed bacteria, which again, we don't want bacteria in our small intestine. And if things are moving slowly, that's where they tend to go. They kind of tend to crawl up in that area. And so initially, it is best to remove those foods. Doesn't mean you're not going to still have some fiber. Have some cooked fruits or some fruits that are, or like I said, the carrot salad or some cooked mushrooms. You'll still have some to help move the bowel, but we want it to move effectively and not get stuck. That's why we tend to tell them to remove some of these foods initially.
Yeah. Kind of trying to play around with your ratio of insoluble to soluble fiber, I think is an important tool to optimize your digestion. Because for me, I've noticed definitely pulp and orange juice definitely constipates me, backs me up, slows down my transit time. Whereas the daily Ray Peat carrot salad, I see no slowing down and I see improvement in digestion. So I think being mindful of the type of fiber in the foods that you're consuming and keeping a diary or log of how your digestion varies with that fiber source, I think is super important.
Yeah. Well, and I think, like I said, because the carrot is grown in the ground, it doesn't have a lot of the anti-nutrients that a lot of these other leafy vegetables have, which also I think it also creates a better transit time, right? So all those other leaves are going to have some anti-nutrients that they might inhibit mineral absorption. And so that's the other side of that why we don't want to have those other fibers in there.
Yeah. Okay, so you have helped a lot of people and you've seen a lot of people transition from more of like restrictive dieting, over exercising, and or like fasting or keto background into the pro-metabolic approach. So can you share some tips on how to get started and how to potentially transition into this way of eating?
So the first thing I'd always recommend to people if they're looking to transition, especially if they're low carb, is log your food. You need to kind of see where you're at. So if you're consuming like 50 carbohydrates and 150 grams of fat or 100 grams, 50 grams of protein or whatever your ratios are, you need to know where you're starting at. And then what I always say to people, all right, start adding in more of these food, but maybe even keep your ratios. So if you're eating 100% muscle meat, well, right, let's adjust that. Let's start eating more some shellfish. Let's start adding maybe some liver in, maybe some eggs or whatever that it is more pro-metabolic that you can handle. If you've been avoiding dairy for quite some time, I would say that's not your first food you need to start with. That's probably a later food. And then looking at your fats, then I would say, all right, make them kind of more saturated. Add some coconut oil, make sure they're butter, and get rid of those seed oils or any sort of like nuts and seeds that may be contributing to your fat intake. And then whatever your carbohydrates are, I would slowly start shifting them, maybe 10 to 20 grams per week, depending on how you feel. And and depending on what your total calories, and I don't know if carnivore, I can't imagine that you're eating tons of calories. I don't know if you ever logged during that period of time. So you're now going to have this fuel source that your body is going to try to start using. And so we do want to slowly increase it. And usually what I do with people is I start slowly lowering their fat content as I increase their carbohydrates so that their calories aren't completely all over the place. Again, it always to me depends on that person, because sometimes people are like, look, I'm starting to feel better and I'm hungry. Can I eat more? And I'm like, sure, eat more, pay attention to how it makes you feel, right? If you go over, you'll know, right? You'll start not feeling well, and but try and stay in this tracking of increasing 10, 20 a week, or, whatever kind of feels good to you, with still paying attention to what you're logging and that total caloric intake.
Yeah. Sarah and I definitely took, we kind of transitioned out. So we did log when we were carnivore, and we were really high fat and still high protein because we were really active. And we slowly reduced our fat consumption while we increased our carbs. However, we did kind of just like increase our calories in general. So of course there's going to be accompanying fat gain, especially because we weren't used to being carb fueled. And so I think that's an important thing to remember is be gentle and kind with yourself and meet your body where it's at. You can't just expect your body to be good at burning a different fuel source right away. And so I think you brought up a great point. Think of it as like a lever, like reduce your fat and increase your carbs. Granted, no one here is saying reduce your fat a ton, right? Like we don't want to go to zero fat, but making that transition will, I think, allow your body to be able to transition to this different way of eating and different fuel source, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, that's my experience with people, is it is slow and steady. I mean, I certainly have people that are all in all at once. That's what I did. And you
Yeah.
do get some throwback on that. But sometimes that's what it works for people.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to say if like, hey, if it works and we want to go a little speedy, you're going to hit a few more speed bumps like I did.
Yeah.
We can avoid those, but it's going to be a longer transition. So, most people like, well, I don't really want to put on a lot of weight. I'm like, okay, so we might want to go a little slower, and we just have to reevaluate. And what I honestly find with people that do the best when they go through this transition, at least by adding more calories, because some of these people are coming in are consuming 1,200 calories, and it is the people that do the best are literally the people that almost eat the same thing every day.
Yeah.
It just helps to when you're adjusting things. And I'm not saying you can't eat a massive variety of food, but when you're eating very similar things, it's easy to adjust and shift. And that way you can see, all right, just add 2 ounces of this, 2 ounces of this. Okay. And adjust. And I mean, I've done that with people. We went from 12 to 2,200 plus calories and not gained a pound.
Yeah.
Because it's so, these are really my type A people, but they're so precise. There's some bonus to that. But that doesn't work for everyone. But I will say, if look, hey, if you want to go through this transition, don't worry about variety right now. You'll have variety, but if you want to do it as pain-free as possible, eat similar foods and shift it slowly each week, and it will get you there with the least side effects.
I think that's a great point too, in terms of respecting your gut, right? Because then you can isolate variables better. So if you're going from like eating no plants or carbohydrate sources, then you just add on everything that's pro-metabolic, fruit, sourdough bread, some sugar sources, honey, and things like that, just like a bunch of different things. You don't know what could potentially cause problems.
Yep.
And so I hear so many people, and people message us all the time being like, oh, is that food bad? Or can I not eat that? And I hate that mindset. I think it's more of like, you need to recognize that you're in this transition period and you want to get your body to a place where you can enjoy more foods. However, you're not there yet. We want to get there. You may have to be a little bit more restrictive as you're transitioning, so that way you have the least amount of consequences and side effects. Because ultimately the goal, I chatted with Georgie about this, like ultimately the goal is to be at a place where your body is a little bit more resilient and you can enjoy foods that you thoroughly enjoy and don't see a ton of negative consequences. Of course, like no one here is saying go slam donuts and things that are high in PUFA, but I like your suggestion of, especially while you're transitioning, stick to the same foods, and over time you'll be able to add more variety as one, your metabolism improves, and two, you get to a state where maybe your body is a little bit better at using carbohydrates for fuel.
Exactly. I like to tell everyone that this is like a training process, right? We're training your system to be able to use fuel better. And it's like, if this is your first day in the gym, you're not going to go slam out a 200-pound deadlift. It's just not going to happen, right? You're going to hurt yourself. Everything's going to go to shit.
Yeah.
So that's the same thing is going to happen if you go and do all in one day and you go from 0 to 100. It's not going to feel good to you.
Yeah.
And so if you go into the gym and train properly and build up and increase your weight, and so forth, then you will get there with the least amount of harm. Your joints will be better. Your muscles are going to be better. You're not going to be able to get so sore, and you're going to get to your destination a lot quicker. And a lot of times when we train, right, I mean, we want to use the same kind of we want to have those large muscle groups and those same exercises in our program. We don't want a completely different variety every single time we go in, right? Because we want to train, we want to get our body used to things. And again, when you get through this training process, whatever that looks like to you, the goal is, like you said, to be able to eat a variety of everything, of anything you possibly want at some level. Because the thing is, the magic of this is when you get to that place, all of those things that you wanted so badly before, usually you don't want them as much, and if you do, you can have a little bit of them and you're fine. And it's like your entire mind and your system shifts to a place where now food isn't controlling you.
Yeah, where like you can't go out to eat with family members because you're literally afraid of the reaction that your body can have, or afraid that you won't be able to select anything on the menu, and things like that.
Yeah, it's not a good place. Now, and people can go on this route too, and all of a sudden create some of these thoughts as well. Like, I don't want to go out because I'm going to have PUFA, right? And we can still become a little bit crazy with all of the rules, And I'm like, look, it's like everything. There's certain rules in the beginning because we're trying to get you to a place of better health, and it's not. You can call it restrictive. I mean, I don't like to use those words. I'm like, look, it's just part of the training.
Yeah.
This is what we do. I go, don't use those words. It's gonna, things will shift as long as you kind of get through this training process. And
yeah, so I like to think of it as this journey into pro-metabolic is more so an understanding of physiology and understanding how food works to support you or how it can potentially be harmful. And so it's more of like understanding how certain foods support your metabolism, support your biology, and prioritizing those. Not necessarily being this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. It's just more of that understanding. And I think that just helps you make better food choices to begin with, rather than eliminating an entire food group or things like that, where it can get really restrictive. And like you said, people can make pro-metabolic super restrictive as well. I think it just depends on where you are at in your journey and the state of your gut health. For example, like I know that I can't pound down a bunch of starches right now because I have some weird mold stuff going on in my gut. And I recognize that if I increase my starch amount past a certain level, I get slow transit time. And so I'm just like recognizing that right now, at this point in time, I have to be a little restrictive on my starch intake because I want to be able to efficiently eliminate toxins with poop, because that's important. And I realize that as I continue to improve my metabolism and some of these markers, I will be able to improve my digestion and eventually be able to enjoy a slice of homemade einkorn sourdough bread when I feel like it.
Yep. Yeah. Because I mean, and I'm like you, I get messages every day. Can I have this food? Can I have this? Can I have that? Can I have this? I go, I don't know. Maybe you can, maybe you can't.
Yeah.
But ultimately, right. And I think you said it perfectly. I go, it's just that, look, this is what works for your biology the best. And if you focus on these foods and know, I want to be healthy, these are the foods right now in my life that I feel best on. And I might still choose later to eat a food that is not optimal. Okay, you can still have it. You shouldn't restrict it. But usually what happens when they have it, they're usually like, I don't feel very good. And they might not have it for 3 more months, right? Or because as soon as you say to yourself, I can't have that, you want that.
Yeah.
And that's the pattern we're trying to avoid. We're trying to get you into a place where you can choose whatever you want based not on restriction, but based on what is best for you.
Yeah.
If you always come a place and the question is, what's going to work best for me versus I want that and I can't have it. But what works best for me? Well, I know I feel best on X, Y, and Z right now. Okay, cool. Have X, Y, and Z right now.
Yeah. Okay, so one thing that we forgot to touch on in terms of like pro-metabolic principles is fatty acid sources. So I think the general consensus is we want to prioritize saturated fats versus polyunsaturated fats, PUFAs. And can you explain why PUFAs interfere with generation of energy, which is one of the main points and goals of the pro-metabolic approach?
Well, as we know, is a saturated fat is fully saturated. The unsaturated fats are going to have many double bonds. So I think their bonds are stronger, but unfortunately, it makes them more susceptible to oxidation. And of course, because we are an oxygen carrying machine, so these PUFAs, when they're in the system and they interact with oxygen, they tend to create more free radicals. Free radicals are going to create more tissue damage. They're going to basically kind of systemically move through your system. So what does that end up leading to? More aging, more illness, and this is of course long-term. And this is of course, if we end up using them as energy. If we store them, they're not as damaging. But if we get into a place where all of a sudden we become a fat burner and now we're releasing just copious amounts of PUFAs into our system, right? They are going to have also a very metabolically slowing effect. They interact with thyroid function. They interact with mitochondria of your cell. They interact with how they're going to interact with oxygen and their oxidative pathways. So, and ultimately long term, they have a metabolically slowing effect. And that is probably the main reason, unknowingly, why they were initially recommended, or at least the essential fatty acids were. Because back in when George and Mildred Boards kind of discovered that these EFAs were making animals better, when they were giving them a high carbohydrate diet, and one had essential fatty acids and one did not, and the one that had essential fatty acids did much better. But what they essentially learned at that time was that the ones that did not have the essential fatty acids were nutrient deficient. Because when you do not have the essential fatty acids, your metabolism will increase. And when your metabolism increases, you need more nutrients. And so basically what they discovered at the time is the animals without the EFAs were in a B vitamin nutritional deficiency, and they started having all these issues. So it wasn't a good thing. It was just showing you that, hey, we're having nutritional deficiencies, and now we're having all these skin problems and all these other issues. So you can see with that kind of story how you're looking at it with context. Understanding now in hindsight, right, you can see, oh, well, that's why, right? And that's why when people consume PUFAs or omegas and they say, I feel better, my inflammation's better, my skin looks better, a variety of different things, I'm like, well, there's some level that it's suppressing your immune system and slowing metabolic function, giving you less nutritional requirements, which can make some of these things improve.
Okay, so that's an important point. So let's touch on that. So you hear a lot of people say that like being a carbohydrate burner or consuming sugar depletes your body of vitamins and minerals. So can you touch on how we should rephrase that discussion in terms of your body just requires more?
Yeah. So anything metabolic will increase your body's need for nutrition. So sugar is one of those things. Sugar is highly metabolic. Fructose is glucose highly metabolic. So when we consume more of these things, our bodies will need more nutrition. And that's part of the responsibility with a high metabolic approach, right? You can, if you just eat copious amounts of white sugar, you can, and it will increase your metabolism, but you're going to feel like garbage because you don't have any nutrition with it, and you're going to have all these nutritional deficiencies show up. So that's why, white sugar can get this bad rap. And then you see these studies like, oh, look, when you took all the sugar, these nutrients depleted or got lower. And I'm like, well, of course they will, because anything metabolic, I mean, living will deplete nutrition. You have to replenish it constantly, right? So if we isolate those things and don't replenish them, they're going to be lower. And that's, you hear it with a lot of other things, right? Anything, and we don't have to go on this, but vitamin D, right? I mean, that's a huge controversy right now. But in my opinion, it's very metabolic. So yes, it will lower certain nutrients if you use it. And the sun does that as well. And thyroid hormone and coffee and all of these thermogenic kind of things are going to create that effect. But you need to contextually know it's because they're using more of those things.
And it's essentially like your body is just producing more energy. And so, of course, it's going to need the necessary tools it needs more of the necessary tools, vitamins, minerals, cofactors, whatever, to produce more energy. And so it really makes sense if you just take a step back. And so I really like the way you phrase it. Like, all right, this is a reminder to the audience here that if you want to increase your metabolism, which I think everyone should, I think it's a great way to thrive and live a really healthy life. It comes at a responsibility of making sure that one, you are consuming like enough food, and two, you're prioritizing like getting your nutrients in to be able to properly fuel your body and not become depleted of some of these vitamins and minerals. And that's why I just love fruit and honey. And sorry, there was something just flew by. That's why I like fruit and honey, because they have a lot of minerals with them. And that's why I don't really prioritize white sugar, one, for sustainability reasons. And then also, I just want to make sure that I'm consuming as much vitamins and minerals as I can, but I don't like fear sugar anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Even it took me 2 years kind of on this approach that I mean, I still couldn't wrap my head around white sugar.
Yeah.
I was still like stevia, I could maybe some honey.
Yeah.
And then I finally got to a point, and I remember just listening to Ray because and people were like, what about stevia? And he's like, I don't know, why would you do that? Just have sugar. And I'm like, And I'm like,
Yeah.
and then and it gets a bad rap, and I get it, but good, it is a very viable, very useful food, especially on an energy standpoint. When you're coming from an energy perspective, sugar is a great food, and especially for people that have a really high metabolic rate and maybe get a lot of nutrition. It's a cheaper way to get fuel in.
Yeah.
Because a lot of men out there, if they're burning 3, 4, 5,000 calories to get extra fuel in, yeah, adding some sugar is not a bad thing, and it can be more affordable.
Context. So in the context of a nutrient dense diet, where you're consuming your muscle meats, you're consuming your gelatin sources, your shellfish, your oysters, your liver, when you're consuming those, sugar is not a problem. But still remember to don't just consume sugar for your carbohydrate sources.
Exactly. Yeah. And I usually find it's easier to give to men than women, right? Women are still in this tight frame of what they want to eat. I can't eat over this much. I'm worried about this much. And so, if you're giving me this much room for your calories, especially right now in the state you're at, they need to be filled with nutrition. There's not going to be a lot of room for like chips or sugar or foods that aren't going to give you some sustainability. There will be later, but in the beginning we need to pack all this nutrition into that, whatever, 1,800 calories.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point to add on to the tips for the transition is like, don't go slamming a bunch of Coke and white sugar at the start, because you're probably coming from a nutrient deficient. You may be coming from a nutrient deficient diet. We need to prioritize getting those vitamins and minerals in as your metabolism is speeding up. So you'll need even more than what you needed before. And yeah, so I think it's kind of just more, for me, it's more like the mindset shift of like sugar is not necessarily toxic. That was like a huge point in my life, because you're told elsewhere that it is literally poison. And it really helped me move past a lot of my food fears that I think were really causing a lot of stress to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah, and they do. And I think a lot of it is because, a lot of the data and a lot of the research, when you do look at these sugar studies, it usually is either an excess
Yeah.
or the form they're giving it in, and then you have to look at what else they're eating. And so, anytime you give people excess calories, yeah, you're not going to get a good result. They can't utilize them. And then you also have to look at the person, right? If you're dealing with a bunch of people that are already sick and have metabolic issues and you give them a bunch of sugar, it might not fare well initially. So, the big picture, you have to look at everything. And that's the thing about looking at a study. You can't just look at what the study says. You got to go look through it. How did you do it? Who are the people? Does this make sense?
Yeah. Okay, so clearly, pro-metabolic community believes that not fasting and being carb fueled is the best way to thrive. And if someone is not consuming that, if they're keto or carnivore or fasting and you feel great, that's awesome. However, Kate, what is your view on why people are feeling better on keto or with fasting, or limiting their carbohydrate intake? This will definitely
Um,
be controversial, but I like to get your viewpoint on this.
I think there can be a lot of reasons why somebody might feel better removing carbohydrate. If they have really poor gut function and you remove a lot of those fibers, that's going to feel better. And so that is one reason. Another one that I think we've just kind of touched on and kind of going into that is if somebody is really nutrient deficient. And honestly, if you go low carb or no carb, your metabolism is going to start slowing down, because now you're not getting your most optimal resource. Your carbon dioxide production is going to slow down. And so every process will start slowing. So if you are having some nutritional deficiencies, then they will go away because now you have a lower need for those nutrients. And I think we kind of touched on it. Like B1 is one of those that you need about double if you're consuming carbohydrates to if you are just consuming like proteins. It's because B1 is a huge player in the metabolism of glucose. And so if you remove carbohydrates, if you had a B1 deficiency or a B1 issue, then that goes away. And I think that's what happens with a lot of people. And so it seems, right, we think when we kind of fortified all this food that supposedly we took away all these deficiencies. But and even in the Ray Peat world, and what I've seen is because the actual a lot of these B vitamins, the optimal places like beef liver and egg yolks and milk. B1 though is coming from like the hulls of of rice or wheat germ or nutritional yeast. And even in the peat world, that nutrient doesn't get consumed at a high amount. And everyone's now consuming a lot more carbohydrates. So what you start possibly seeing is, hey, are these people getting B1 deficient? Certainly in the carnivore world, I think that can be a big player. And so if they are deficient somewhere and you start adding carbs, they're going to feel like crap doing that. So a lot of people, their recommendation is, if you are B1 deficient, is remove carbohydrates because you'll feel better. But is that the answer? You could definitely eat more foods with B1, and you could possibly add in a B1 supplement because sometimes that can kind of trigger it to kind of kick on and feel better. That's certainly where I'm experimenting with some people right now, and it seems to really be working. And so that's kind of this tangent I've been going off. I'm like, I've just been hearing that a lot of people that have now, were like me, not eating a ton of carbs and now eating a lot more are still having some issues. And they can be some blood sugar issues, lactic acid. They feel like they're kind of sore all the time. Digestive issues, because B1 is very integrated into the vagal tone of your vagus nerve. So that's going to integrate into GI issues if you have some. So it really can integrate into a lot of different things. And so if it is something that, you're kind of listening to this and go, yeah, when I did that, I had all those issues. It might be something to experiment with.
That's really interesting. I had no idea when you are consuming carbohydrates and are carb fueled, your B1 requirements doubles.
Yeah. So when you look at like aerobic respiration or glucose respiration, that transition between glucose and pyruvate,
Yeah.
and then you go pyruvate to acetyl-CoA. That pyruvate to acetyl-CoA, I think it's what's the enzyme? I wrote it down. Pyruvate dehydrogenase. Yep. That is thymine cofactor. Thymine is a cofactor into that transition. Yeah. And so that is where glucose is, obviously, because fatty acids are going to kind of enter the Krebs cycle at that point. So you need a lot more B1 in glucose metabolism. And so if you are consuming a lot more, and again, in the peat world, a lot of these sources where B1 in are not being consumed. So it is a thought to investigate if you are A, kind of going along the track and finding issues, or B, you aren't eating carbs and you're thinking, I wonder if that is a possibility at this point.
That's really, really interesting. And when you were explaining the glucose metabolism, you mentioned thiamine. So thiamine is
Yeah,
vitamin.
sorry. Yeah, thiamine and B1 are the exact same thing.
And I just looked up, NIH has like a list of foods high in thiamine. Thiamine, white rice is listed as high.
It's actually the outside of the white rice. So
Oh,
if they've kind of stripped it, it's not going to be high.
interesting.
Pork is, I think, like pork
Yep.
is a decent amount. Like wheat germ is some. Rice bran is particularly high in B1. Interesting enough, I think I'm going to guess that's maybe why Morley Robbins recommends it.
I actually have some wheat germ as like a supplement that he recommended, and I may just try adding that back in just to experiment.
Yeah. Yeah, I know Dr. Peat recommends wheat germ over like rice bran. I think just because of the digestibility can be
Yeah.
for the rice bran. I've read different from each one of those. I do like to kind of see where they conflict and where they're different.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, definitely the B1, right? I mean, here's the other caveat with B1 that I found really interesting is that supposedly if you actually are B1 deficient, like a 10 milligrams should be the thing that gets you over. So that's
Yeah.
not a lot. I think, your RDA is like 1.2 milligrams. So if you're deficient, 10 will get you over. But what we are finding is if you high dose it, B1 at high doses can work as a carbonic hydrogenase inhibitor, which is that essentially does is it will inhibit the breakdown of carbon dioxide. So thinking of it as on a metabolic standpoint, if you are now, let's say if you aren't producing enough carbon dioxide and you do a high B1 supplement and it now keeps you from breaking it down, it's going to allow for more carbon dioxide, which when we know we have more carbon dioxide, that can help facilitate bringing lactic acid down. And then that can help the entire cellular respiration occur. So I think in fact, I found a study where they were studying it for COVID because it works very similarly to, is it acetamycin or I think acetazolamide.
Okay.
Which is Diamax.
Okay.
Right? That's what they call it, right? Which they use for like altitude sickness.
Yeah.
Right. That's the common medication for altitude sickness, right? Because that's what it does, right? You go into altitude.
High CO2.
Yeah. Yep. Well, yeah. So you go into altitude, there's less oxygen in the air.
Yep.
So you give somebody something that's going to inhibit carbon dioxide production so that they have higher carbon dioxide so that it would help facilitate oxygen getting into the tissue. Yeah. So that's why they feel better. So B1 is supposed to work very similarly as that. And that's why they were using it because of obviously all the breathing issues and so forth with COVID.
So just to touch on something I don't think we explained enough earlier, the Bohr effect, the higher CO2 you have in your body, the better your oxygen will be distributed to tissues throughout your body. Whereas the less CO2 you have, the more oxygen binds to hemoglobin and the less oxygen is delivered to your tissues. It's counterintuitive to what a lot of people say, but we want more CO2 so that we can get more oxygen throughout our body in our tissues. So you're saying that high B1 supplementation can potentially facilitate that?
Right, by inhibiting the carbon dioxide breakdown.
Okay, interesting.
Because carbonic anhydrase is the enzyme that breaks down carbon dioxide.
Okay.
Right. Okay. And so this inhibits that. So that you'll have more. Right.
So potentially something to experiment with. And again, always work with some sort of practitioner whenever you're supplementing. But Kate, I'm going to track how much B1 I'm having as like a baseline this next week. And then I'll try experimenting with adding in a little bit more and just see what happens.
Yeah, and also a good thing to note is B1 works really well with magnesium. I think both of those facilitate so many things in your body that sometimes increasing the B1, it's sometimes good to have some additional magnesium when you have B1.
Okay.
So it could be and also because of what it's doing, it's good to take that early.
Yeah, and I'm relatively deficient in magnesium because I did the HTMA test, and so I'm low in magnesium, so I have to supplement a lot to begin with. So I will keep that in mind with potentially increasing my magnesium. But returning back to why people likely feel better is that like when you're on a standard American diet, which the pro-metabolic is not, like the pro-metabolic nutrition strategy is not, it gets clumped into standard American diet because people think that whenever you're consuming carbohydrates, like you're carb fueled, but the standard American diet is high PUFA, high carbs, largely starches, and the combination of PUFA plus starches is like a recipe for disaster with substrate competition and high levels of energy throughout your body. No good. Pro-metabolic is not that, and I think it gets clumped into that. So you're likely nutrient deficient when you are on a standard American diet. When you're carb fueled, you need more nutrients, you need more vitamins, you need more minerals. And then, thus, when you reduce the carbohydrates and you are no longer carb fueled, your requirement for vitamins and minerals drops. And so, therefore, being slightly nutrient deficient in some of these things is okay when you are potentially fat fueled. Is that correct summary?
Yeah, I would say definitely that is a big part of it. I think anytime you take away your main driver for producing energy, you're going to lower the need for everything else, right? Remove something that's requiring it, you're going to lower the need. So that will show up. And I also think, yeah, I mean, people that are coming off, if let's say you're coming off a standard American diet and your digestion is complete shit, and all of those high fibrous or processed foods or whatever you're eating are highly irritating you.
Yeah.
Once you remove all those, right, that feels better, right? I mean, and having about a movement, that all of that's going to feel better. And I do think a carnivore or keto like diet, there's going to be a little bit of an adrenaline kick in there. You've got to at some point go through gluconeogenesis to produce some carbohydrates for your brain, for other parts. So there's going to be a little probably cortisol spikes going on or adrenaline spikes. So that feels good. And,
Yeah.
and that's why I do think people really do feel good initially for a while.
Yeah.
And it's, especially with women, I think just long term their hormones go to shit, as you probably experience, and it's just not sustainable.
Yeah. Before keto and carnivore for myself, I was very plant based and I was consuming the wrong type of vegetables and not cooking them properly, like slamming down a bunch of like not properly cooked cabbage, bok choy, broccoli, cauliflower, and then like really my only protein source was eggs. And I was dairy free, so consuming all these like nut milks with all these gums and stuff. And so I go from that to carnivore, where I'm finally getting bioavailable nutrients. I'm getting a lot of great saturated fat, and I don't have a lot of those digestive issues, inhibitors with all those plant foods. Yeah, I felt great. And then I really did reach like I don't feel good anymore. I don't feel like I'm at my best anymore. And there was a lot of warning signals, like I was gaining weight at low calories. I was eating high calories throughout carnivore, and then I tried to do like a cut. But then my weight started getting weird. Our hormone issues started to get amplified. We weren't sleeping well. And so I think everyone maybe has like a cortisol threshold. And if they're able to keep other parts of their life low cortisol and they can maintain keto and carnivore, like that's great. If you're feeling good with that, that's awesome. However, don't feel like you have to be pressured to eat a certain way. And if you don't feel good on a keto and carnivore diet, even though like health experts are saying that that's what's best, like it's okay. Like there are plenty of other options, and I feel great eating this way. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people always say that to me. They're like, do you just tell people like what they should be eating? And I'm like, I don't tell anybody what they should be eating unless they ask me. I mean, and because if they're good, that's fine. And everyone's on their own journey, and I'm not here to tell them their journey's wrong. We all have to go out, I went through a million different diets, right? I mean, I got to the place when I was 38, 39. So I was a good bit older than you. So I had done 20 different things that I thought were the greatest thing ever. And, but I never, even though I have a physiology and psychology background, it just putting it into nutrition, it never got there with me. Like you just don't make that conclusion because you're just thinking low calorie, lose weight. That's my goal.
Yep. So Kate, do you mind sharing your age? I think that a big thing I hear is, hey, your tolerance for carbs goes down as you age. And people are saying like, hey, the pro-metabolic approach really only works for people in their 20s and early 30s.
Yeah. So I'm 49. I started when I was 38, 39. And so I've done 10 years, and I consume more carbs than I ever did ever in my 20s or 30s.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I will tell you this, I mean, I was a very obsessive type A exerciser, workouter, whatever. And, but I was always hungry and I was always craving carbohydrates, literally for 20 years. And it's exhausting, to be honest. And anybody that's done that, we know it's all exhausting. And, especially people in the fitness industry, we are exhausting human beings. And so we get, a lot of us get into this field because we have an obsession with how we want our physiques to be. And
Yeah.
so this is a green light for us to be a little bit OCD.
Yep.
And so anyways, 10 years later, I do not obsess about carbohydrates ever. It's never something that I crave any longer. I can have these things in my refrigerator, freezer forever. I always thought people had like magic powers that could do this. Like, how do you have those cookies still? That was there last week. And, I could have them for, it is always to me, that's literally the greatest gift is I don't have this obsession all the time of what am I going to eat next? What am I going to eat food? What is that? What do I need to do to burn this off? And that was like so much wasted energy.
Yeah.
And it's exhausting, and when you can get away from that, it's your whole world kind of opens up. And so no. And I work with people in their 40s, their 50s, their 60s that have, women well into their 60s that are literally still starving themselves at 1,200 calories. And they think, I'll never be able to eat that. I'm like, yes, we can get you there slow and steady if you're consistent. And we get them 2,000 plus calories. Is the weight just falling off during the course of that? No. Right. But are they feeling a lot better? Are there hormonal issues? Are their migraines now going away? I mean, do they have no energy for their grandchildren? 100%.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Kate, where can people find you? And share a little bit about your book. So this is a book that Sarah and I stumbled upon, I guess over a year now. And Kate, honestly, like that book was really something that helped us be able to take a step back and reflect on like, okay, what we were doing at the time wasn't working. And it really allowed us to take our health into our own hands, remove ourselves from previous dogma that we had been in, and give us some like a sense of empowerment that we can make some changes that are alternative to what we were previously thinking. So share a little bit about where people can find you and a little bit about your book as well.
So they can find me on Facebook or Instagram at Kate Deering Fitness, or on my site at katedeering.com. The book, like I've said, it came from my first 2 years of experimentation with reading everything Ray and 2 dives in, and then working with clients and trying to shift them and having a really challenging time getting to a place where people were like, you want me to eat what? And so I literally said, I'm going to write this book. And I literally dedicated 2 years of my time and just worked on the weekends. And and I actually really loved it and enjoyed it because I learned so much doing it. I go, this is the best way for you to learn about this is to write about it. Yeah. And so at the end, it was a little bit like, I'm over it, I'm done. But it's a lot about my journey, and it's just kind of with people that I kind of work with during the time, shifting certain things, but it gives you a basic understanding of human biology without making it human biology, and I try to make it as easily to digestible, right? With the pun of the food is easy to digest, but that was my goal. It's like, I need to make sure you can understand it. And so when I actually hired someone to work with, because I said, look, this is my goal. And she's like, you need to, make it like an 8th grader. Yeah. And not saying that people, but when it comes to sciencey things, you lose them if it gets too complex. And so I want it to be available to anyone who can read it and they go, okay, this makes sense. Yeah. So that was the basis of it. I think that right now I'm in the process. In fact, we just finished translating it into French.
Nice. That's awesome.
So that took like a year and a half. Like, no book writing is quick, is all I can tell you. So if you have any French listeners, we have a French book coming.
That's great. That's awesome. Yeah, I I think it does a great job of giving you a great overview. And if you want to dive in deeper into certain topics, it gives you the sense of empowerment and tools to be able to use the right search terms in Google or DuckDuckGo to be able to go down those rabbit holes. I just ask the audience that you keep an open mind when you dive into the book or when you dive into any of Ray Peat's work, because it is kind of, there are some things that are opposite of what we've been told in the past. I definitely had to do some unlearning of certain things, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think that a challenging thing is, and I still have this, is when you do get to a spot where you're like, huh, this is like, sounds confusing. And if you do a Google search, it kind of gives you the wrong path half the time. You
Yeah.
know, it gives you the dogma, just kind of understanding that, you know, of what maybe medicine or most nutritionalists will say. So sometimes that becomes challenging. And so, I mean, I'm lucky I at least can correspond with Ray a bit. So when I have these questions, I'm like, you know, and I know you've talked to him, because he will create a different path and then he'll kind of set you, look at this.
Yeah.
And which is super helpful, because it does become a little bit more challenging. And so that, you know, that's why it is good to go on Instagram on some level, to go some of these accounts. There's a lot of good accounts out there that will present it in a little bit different and quicker and easier to digest little segments,
Yeah.
so that it makes it a little bit easier for you to understand.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. Sometimes when you type things into Google, you're just going to get bombarded with plant-based stuff and nut milks and oat milks and no red meat. So all of that nonsense and garbage too. So it is hard to sort through. So your book, How to Heal Your Metabolism by Kate Deering, is a great starting point in someone's adventure into a pro-metabolic or Ray Peat nutrition style strategy. So definitely would recommend. But all right, I'm not going to take up any more time, Kate. Appreciate you coming on. Do you have any closing remarks for the audience?
The biggest one always is, you know, go in and make shifts slow and steady and literally track stuff. I think that's a huge helper. You know, people are always like, you know, what will you do if you work with somebody? I go, half the time I make them track, and I'm just there to help them understand what their tracking is, and so that they can make shifts. But you can do this on your own. I mean, if you do need people, there are certainly practitioners to help you. But this is, you got to think of this as a learning experience. This is not a destination. It's you getting in touch with your body and how your body works. I think a lot of us are really detached and we just want to plan or this without thinking. And that doesn't work. And so when we really start understanding how our body works and what it needs, things become a lot easier.
Yeah, that's great. I think that is, honestly, there is no one size fits all. There is no one single dietary strategy, like set of rules that's going to work for everyone. You are going to have to tweak certain things. There are general rules and principles, but then how those are actually applied to you is going to vary and depend on your past, your gut health, your current occupation, your activity level, your age, and things like that. So I think it really is important to keep an open mind and, like you said, track things. And it's a journey to be able to find a place where we're functioning at our best, we're thriving. And yeah, your book
Yep.
is a great starting point for that. So
Yep. 100% agree.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kate. Really appreciate it. And we'll have to get you back on the channel at some point, but hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.